Hello, today I'd like to talk about managing your indie team. I think this is something people don't really think about. They're like, we'll just band together and we'll be awesome and create a great game. But I think you really need to figure out how the team is going to come to decisions, because if stakeholders are sort of at odds with each other and you don't have a process to resolve that, then it can be problematic. And so, like, for example, on Retrograde, we didn't really have that, and so sometimes it was tough to make a decision, important decisions, and sometimes we weren't, everyone on the team wasn't really happy with the results. So having a formal process in place is a great idea. So one system I've heard from other indie developers is the idea of basically having stakeholders who are in control of all decisions in a certain category. So, like, for example, one person might be in charge of design and art and creative things, and another person might be in charge of technical and business aspects. And so then, if it's a business decision, the business person has to make it. If it's a creative decision, the creative person has to make it. And certainly, there's overlap, because if you say, the game needs to ship by this date, is the creative person going to be happy with it? Is the business person going to be happy with the slip? But, at least sort of those well-defined roles are helpful. And certainly, if there's overlap, then it's tough to, say, if, like, for example, I code and Dan on our team codes, and so if I want things to be coded a certain way, do I push on Dan to do that, or do I sort of just let Dan do his own thing and sort of trust in that, and so these are things you need to think about. Another interesting process I've heard, and I don't really know much about it, but there's like a Quaker or something decision-making process where you eventually and somehow get everyone to agree, to come to a consensus, where everyone agrees. I don't really know much about it, but I think I heard an indie game developer talk about how they used that and how it kept everyone happy. So certainly that's an option. What we do at Infinitap is it's sort of like a benevolent dictatorship, hopefully. I'm sort of the guy who makes all the decisions. But, finding a good team and keeping people happy, who are working for you is important. So, I try to sort of make sure everyone has sort of enough control and enough, say that they'll be happy. And, like, for example, I talked about Dan wants to implement something a certain way. I don't micromanage, even if it's exactly the opposite way I would do it, or if, I don't like reading his code. I've sort of resigned to the fact, and I don't know, probably every programmer out there would agree with me, is that no one likes anyone else's code, ever. I don't think I've met a programmer whose code I'm like, yes, this is perfect, this is just the way I like it. Everyone has their own style and own way of doing things, and none of them agree with me, and I've pulled bits and pieces of coding styles from other people I've worked with, but in the end, there's no one's code I'm completely happy with, especially when you're really working closely with them. So that's certainly, the fact that, all of Dan's code isn't how I would do things, or, I have trouble reading it because he's using LinQ all the time, everywhere. I think that's sort of independent development has its appeals because you don't get, decisions forced down from above. And so if I were to try and, say, Dan, you gotta not use LinkQ, or you have to, use a different coding standard or this certain piece of technology that I didn't really research, and so it may be a terrible decision, then working on the project would be a lot less fun for Dan, and he would be unhappy, and, then he wouldn't work with us, and that would be a great loss for the team. But, I mean, sometimes everyone has to eat the proverbial crap sandwich, and, like, for example, Dan was doing the gameplay logic for the stair climbing, which was a massive, massive, massive pain in the butt. And he was miserable doing it, and I'm sure it was very miserable, but, someone needed to do it, and I didn't have time, so... I mean, everyone has decisions that they're not happy with, and not every aspect of game development is fun. But, if I said, Dan, you gotta do this, and he refused, and said, like, that's not my thing, then that would make it hard for me, because, I have my hands full, in a lot of aspects of the project. I do programming, I do the project management, I do the marketing, I do the... I work with the artists, I do game design, so I have a lot of work on my plate, and certainly the stairs were a lot of work, and I think it was worth it, but I think it was definitely a lot of work, and so being able to push that off to Dan, is sort of essential to create the game we want to make. And, sometimes with the artists, I make them redo things over and over and over and over, just because it's like, no, it has to be a certain way, or that's not good enough, or it's not, quite how I wanted it or envisioned it, and I mean, I'm probably not super duper fun to work with on that regard, but I mean, I do, try and hopefully make a good work environment for the artists, and hopefully they don't hate working for me or anything. So, yeah, I mean, I think, certainly being a benevolent dictatorship has its advantages, because there's really very few arguments, because, I make a decision and I don't really even usually justify it to anyone. Granted, I could be making very bad decisions, but certainly I think in terms of, running an indie project and doing the, all aspects of it, from Retrograde, I have the most experience on the team. I've been doing the indie thing the longest, so certainly I think, I have a good idea of what it takes, at least I hope so. And then, I mean, obviously I consult with everyone and try and get buy-in. It's rare when I feel like I'm sort of cramming something down the team's throat, which obviously is something you want to avoid, because no one will be happy with that. So, I mean, certainly that works for me. I mean, if you have a studio you're founding with other people, then, saying that you'll be the benevolent dictator might not really sit well with them. I mean, certainly when we started, 24 Karat Games, we were partners, but Infinitab Games sort of evolved out of me just doing my own sort of side projects and some contracting and consulting stuff, and I built up a team, and then, we had we wanted to try our hand at creating an original game, after Retrograde shipped and after we finished the terrible, embarrassing National Geographic's Dino Land on iOS, which you should totally not download, because it's embarrassing. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely something you have to think about, and how you want to run your company and how you want to keep everyone happy, because the decisions are hard to make. It's tough, being an indie developer, and you're sort of given enough rope to hang yourself with, if you choose poorly. I mean, it's something to think about, and you don't want to spend your time arguing or maybe going down the wrong path because you know, a certain stakeholder is set in, you know, a way. I don't know. I mean, there's a ton of mistakes that can be made, and certainly I made a lot of mistakes on you know, retrograde, and I'm sure a lot of indie developers have made mistakes, and so I think it's you know, really important to try and figure out, you know, how you can keep things smoothly and you know, keep marching forward, because it's tough doing indie dev. You don't have a lot of time for mistakes, at least in my experience. Anyway, thanks for watching.